It took exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's carefully constructed political image to fall apart on live TV. I know that probably sounds like total clickbait. It's the kind of hype the internet pushes every day but never actually delivers on. But I was right there in the studio, watching the whole thing go down in real time. And more importantly, I witnessed the massive fallout that followed. It was a total reckoning. It was the moment when hard evidence met political narrative, and reality delivered a knockout blow so intense that poli-sci professors still use it to teach about preparation, meeting opportunity. The stage was set perfectly, almost like a scene from a movie. We were at America Uncensored, a primetime special on the fastest-growing conservative network in the country. The setup was simple and unforgiving. 90 minutes, no holds barred, no topics off limits, and absolutely no safety net. Just two people, two mics, and the cold, hard truth. Or, in AOC's case, the total lack of it. Inside that black briefcase Dan Bongino brought on stage were 37 pages that would effectively end a career. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. The audience that night was split right down the middle. Half were progressive activists who'd camped out for seats, while the other half were conservatives who'd flown in from all over. You could literally feel the tension in the room. Camera crews were locked into 8 different angles. Social media teams were poised to clip every single second. This wasn't just another debate. This was the Super Bowl of political theater. AOC made her entrance first. Naturally, she knew exactly how to play the room. She walked in flanked by the squad like a celebrity entourage, all decked out in their signature bold colors and practicing those confident, "We're making history" smiles. You could feel the energy. The progressive side of the crowd went wild. Shouts of AOC, AOC filled the room. She gave a wave. She blew kisses to every lens in the building. Her stylist definitely earned their paycheck that night. She looked exactly like the revolutionary leader she's built her brand on. Then Bongino stepped out. He was alone. No entourage, no hype, just that black briefcase in his hand, and a look that anyone with a law enforcement background would recognize in a heartbeat. It's that specific look a detective gets when they've caught a suspect red-handed, and they're just waiting for the perfect moment to close the trap. He was calm, patient, and dangerous. He placed the briefcase on his desk with a deliberate slowness that forced every camera to zoom in. AOC's smile slipped for just a split second. A tiny flicker of doubt before she masked it. But I caught it. The audience caught it. And back in the control booth, a producer was already ordering the crew to keep a lens on that briefcase at all times. The moderator, a veteran journalist with 30 years under his belt, laid out the rules. Each side would get an opening statement, followed by a free-form debate with very little interference. The only restriction was no personal shots at family members. Everything else was fair game. AOC took the floor first. She was clearly well-rehearsed, hitting her talking points with practiced precision. Climate justice, the wealth gap, and the need for bold leadership in tough times. She spoke about her district, about working-class families, and about the billionaire class. It was basically a greatest hits tour, and her supporters loved every second of it. It was 7 minutes of pure red meat for the progressive base. Then it was Bongino's turn. He stood up slowly, adjusted his jacket, and looked straight into the camera. He didn't look at AOC or the moderator. He looked at the millions of people watching from their living rooms. "I didn't come here tonight to debate theories," he said, his voice carrying that sharp New York directness and cop-like authority. "I didn't come here to argue over the meaning of socialism or the morality of capitalism. I came here with receipts, 37 pages of them. And before this night is over, everyone watching is going to see exactly who Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez really is. He sat back down. 4 sentences. That was his entire opening statement. The moderator looked stunned. "Mr. Bongino, you still have 5 minutes left if you want them." "I'm good," he replied, tapping the briefcase. "I'll just let the evidence speak for itself." AOC laughed. She actually chuckled. "Receipts? What is this? Some kind of Twitter beef? I'm here to have a serious policy discussion." "Oh, we're definitely going to discuss policy," Bongino cut in. His tone shifted instantly. You could tell the trap was about to spring. "Let's start with last Tuesday." "Your Tuesday, because I think the American people should know how you actually spend your time while you're lecturing them about struggle and sacrifice." He popped open the briefcase. "Tuesday, November 14th. Bongino started pulling out the first document. 9:17 a.m. You posted an Instagram photo from your apartment in D.C. It was a beautiful post, actually. Very on-brand for you. You're holding a coffee mug, looking all thoughtful. And the caption says, "Let me get this right. Still pushing for a Green New Deal that puts working families first," the post read. "We can't afford to wait." He held up his phone, displaying the post on the large monitor. AOC gave a nod, looking quite satisfied with herself. "That's a great message," Bongino remarked. "It's truly inspiring." "Now let's take a look at what went down right after you posted that." He then produced a second document. At 12:40 p.m. Your Tesla Model 3, the one you picked up last year for $48,000, which actually exceeds the median household income in your district, was valeted at Donatello's, that upscale Manhattan steakhouse, where even the cheapest entree costs $76. The valet charge came out to $47. That's $47 just to park the electric car you drove from D.C. to New York while lecturing Americans on why they should give up their vehicles for the climate. A low murmur spread through the crowd. AOC's smile was beginning to look a bit forced. "But wait," Bongino said, his voice now filled with a hint of excitement. "That valet receipt was only the appetizer. Take a look at the bill for lunch." He held it high. The figure 312.67 was plainly visible on the screen. "That's $300 for a lunch for 2. It included a Wagyu steak and the truffle pasta. An excellent choice, I might add. There was also a bottle of wine that cost more than what most Americans spend on a week's worth of groceries, plus dessert. The tip by itself was $62. He paused to let that really sink in. "Now, Congresswoman, I'm not suggesting you shouldn't spend your money as you please. You did earn that $174,000 salary from Congress. Well, earned might be a bit of a stretch, but you are legally entitled to it. My point is that you spent more on a single lunch than the average Social Security recipient in your district receives for an entire week. And you did all that on the very same day you posted about your fight for working families." AOC tried to interject, attempting to explain the context of that meeting. "Oh, I'm a big fan of context," Bongino said, pulling out yet another document. "Let's provide some more. Right after lunch, you went on a shopping spree. There's a high-end sustainable fashion boutique just 3 blocks away from Donatello's. It's very trendy, very pricey, and very much in line with the saving the planet by buying $400 organic cotton t-shirts vibe. Your receipt shows you spent $800 on clothes." As he detailed this day of fighting for working families, the progressive side of the audience grew quiet. Meanwhile, the conservatives in the room were leaning in, completely engaged. Then came my favorite part. At 6:43 p.m., you tweeted, and I'll quote you here, Families across America are struggling to afford groceries while billionaires get tax breaks. This is immoral. Bongino looked up from his papers and stared directly at AOC. So, Congresswoman, let me see if I've got your definition of morality straight. In a single day, you spent more on a lunch than a minimum wage worker earns in a whole week. You spent more on clothes than what most families budget for groceries in a month. You drove a car that costs as much as a full year's salary for the very people you claim to represent. And then you had the nerve to lecture the rest of America about families who are struggling. The silence in that studio was absolutely deafening. The Green New Deal isn't actually about saving the planet, Bongino said, his voice dropping to a tone that was almost conversational, almost mournful. It's about ensuring your Tesla has a place to charge, while truck drivers in Ohio are losing their livelihoods. It's about making sure you feel righteous while working-class Americans can't even afford to heat their homes. That isn't environmentalism, Congresswoman. That's just elitism with a socialist bumper sticker slapped onto the back. The conservative side of the room erupted. It was the kind of applause and cheering you hear when someone finally says what half the country has been thinking out loud. AOC was stammering now, clearly struggling to regain her composure. This is being taken completely out of context. That meeting was held with environmental advocates who happened to eat $150 steaks. Bongino simply raised an eyebrow. That's quite an interesting strategy for fighting climate change. I'm sure the cows really appreciated the irony of it all. Even a few of the progressives in the crowd couldn't help but laugh at that. But don't you worry, Bongino said as he closed the first section of his briefcase. That was only Tuesday. We have 4 whole years of Tuesdays to go through. And if you're at home tired of politicians preaching equality while living like kings and queens, believe me, you'll want to see what's next. Because that was only the appetizer. AOC tried to pivot and take back control of the conversation. She dove into her usual talking points about corporate greed and standing up to Amazon, mentioning her proudest moment, blocking Amazon's HQ2 from coming to Queens. I stood up to one of the most powerful corporations on earth, she said, her confidence beginning to return. I said no to corporate welfare, no to gentrification, and no to putting profits ahead of people. Bongino let her finish her thought. In fact, he let her bask in the applause from her supporters for a full 10 seconds. Then he spoke. His voice clearly changed. There was a harder edge to it now, something deeply personal. You stood up, all right, he remarked. You stood up and kicked 25,000 families right in the teeth. And I have first-hand knowledge of this, Congresswoman, because I've spent the last 6 months interviewing them. Allow me to introduce you to some of the people whose lives you decided weren't worth a corporate tax break. He pulled out a tablet and pulled up a video. This is Maria Rodriguez, 54 years old, living in Corona, Queens, who raised 3 kids as a single mother while juggling 2 jobs. When Amazon announced HQ2, Maria applied for a position in construction administration. The job paid $78,000 a year. That would have been more than both her current jobs put together. She was more than qualified. She even made it to the 2nd round of interviews. The video featured Maria, a weary-looking woman with kind eyes, sitting in her small apartment. I believed her, Maria said on screen, her voice heavy with emotion. When the Congresswoman claimed she was fighting for us, I really believed her. But that job would have completely changed my life. My daughter could have gone to college without any loans. I might have even been able to retire someday. Now, I'm still stuck at the diner, still cleaning offices at night, and still wondering what my life could have become. Bongino paused the video. The studio fell silent. That's just one person, Congresswoman. Let me show you someone else. Another video played. It was a young Asian man in his late 20s, sitting in what looked like a coffee shop. James Chen, 28, with a computer science degree from CUNY and raised in Flushing, was offered a software engineering role at Amazon HQ2. The starting salary was $120,000. Once you killed the deal, James had to move to Seattle to take a job at Amazon there. He isn't in Queens anymore. His parents are still there. His community is still there. But he isn't, because you decided corporate greed was a bigger enemy than real paychecks for real people. AOC tried to keep her composure, but the cracks were starting to show. These are just individual anecdotes. Individual anecdotes, she countered. Bongino's voice spiked for the first time. These are human beings. These are your own constituents. But you're right. Let's look at the bigger picture. Let's talk about the numbers you clearly never bothered to run before you tanked 25,000 jobs. He pulled out a bound report, impressively thick. This is an economic impact study performed by 3 different economists, one liberal, one conservative, and one independent. They all reached the exact same conclusion. The Amazon deal wouldn't have just created 25,000 direct positions. The ripple effect would have generated an additional 7,000 jobs. Construction workers building the sites, restaurant staff serving the employees, retail workers in the new stores, service industry roles, and small business opportunities. He flipped through the pages. The total economic impact over 10 years, $27 billion. That's billion with a B. In tax revenue alone, even after accounting for the breaks Amazon would have received, New York would have netted $18 billion. The average salary for those 25,000 jobs? $150,000. Do you have any idea what that means for a community? Bongino looked straight at AOC. It means families who can afford to buy homes, kids who can go to college, and small businesses that thrive because people actually have money to spend. It means a thriving, growing community, instead of one that's just struggling to get by. He pulled out even more documents. But let's address the real hypocrisy here. 6 months after you killed those jobs, where did you end up moving? You moved up from your modest apartment in Queens to a luxury building in Navy Yard, D.C. Rent is $3,400 a month. Now I did some math. I know math isn't exactly your forte, but bear with me. That's $4,800 a year just for rent. Do you know what Maria Rodriguez could do with an extra $4,800 a year? She could have sent her daughter to a state school without any loans. She could retire with dignity. She could be living the life you're living right now. The audience was completely riveted. This wasn't just a political debate anymore. This was personal. But Maria didn't get that Amazon job, Bongino continued, because you stood on your high horse and decided corporate greed was the real enemy. Not unemployment, not poverty, and not the lack of opportunity, just corporate greed. And you made that call from a position of privilege that Maria will never experience. He pulled out printed tweets, enlarged for the screen. Let's look at your own words, shall we? March 2018, before the Amazon announcement. Queens needs good-paying jobs that allow families to thrive. Your words. November 2018. After you killed the deal, we don't need jobs from bad corporations. Your words. February 2019. 3 months later, posting from a 40-filer brunch spot in D.C. Sometimes you need to treat yourself. Bongino's voice was dripping with contempt. You treated yourself all right. You treated yourself to a massive national profile. You treated yourself to the status of a celebrity. You gave yourself a lifestyle that working-class people can only ever dream of. And the price for all that was 25,000 jobs for the very people you promised to represent. He pulled out one last document. This is a letter. Actually, it's 127 letters from small business owners in Queens who went under after Amazon left. Restaurant owners who lost expansion plans, construction firms that lost contracts, and retail shops that closed because that expected economic boom never arrived. He read from one of them. Dear Congresswoman, my family ran our deli for 32 years. We made it through recessions, 9/11, and Hurricane Sandy, but we couldn't make it through you. We took out loans to grow and hire more staff because we actually believed in that Amazon project. When you killed it, we were left with debt we couldn't cover and dreams we couldn't reach. We shut our doors in May. My father cried for the very first time in my life. I hope your principles were worth the cost. Signed, Luis Sanchez, former owner of Sanchez Deli in Corona, Queens. The silence in the studio was heavy. You didn't fight corporate greed, Congresswoman, Bongino said in a low voice. You fought opportunity. You fought dreams. You fought against the chance for working-class families to have exactly what you already have. And those people in Queens are still waiting for the jobs you promised were coming. Spoiler alert, they're not coming. But your rent is covered, your Tesla is fully charged, and your Instagram following is only getting bigger. So I guess that's what really matters to you. AOC tried to speak up, her voice trembling. The gentrification that would have happened. Bongino let out a harsh laugh. You want to talk about gentrification? You moved right out of Queens. You literally gentrified yourself right out of your own district. The hypocrisy is so thick I can barely breathe. The moderator tried to jump in to give AOC a moment to recover, but Bongino held up his hand. No, I'm not finished because the folks watching at home need to understand something. This isn't just about one failed deal. This is about a pattern of choosing your ideology over real people, choosing headlines over actual help, choosing your own brand over your responsibility to the public. He looked straight into the camera lens. And if you know someone who lost their job, their business, or their dream because of this decision, share this with them because politicians need to know we haven't forgotten. We keep the receipts, and eventually, everyone has to pay for their choices. The moderator called for a quick 10-minute break. When they returned, it was clear AOC had been coached during the break. She came out swinging, trying to reclaim the narrative. Let's talk about the real issue our generation is facing, she said, her voice sounding strong again. Climate change is an existential threat. The Green New Deal is the only plan bold enough to actually deal with it. And if that makes people feel uncomfortable or challenges the status quo, then so be it. We need revolutionary change. Bongino waited. He actually let out a smile. Revolutionary change, he repeated. I love that phrase. You know what else is revolutionary? A $93 quadrillion bill that would bankrupt every American alive today, plus their kids and their grandkids. Let's talk about your Green New Deal, Congresswoman, but let's skip the talking points and just do the math. And I realize math isn't exactly your strong suit. You did study economics at BU, didn't you? How did that work out for you? The audience broke into laughter. AOC's jaw tightened. Your plan requires retrofitting every single building in America. Bongino started, his tone shifting into something almost professorial. That's 136 million structures. Everything from houses and offices to warehouses, The average cost to retrofit a building to the standards your plan demands. And these numbers are from the construction industry, not just me, is roughly $50,000 per structure. Some will cost more and some less, but that's the average. He pulled out a calculator just for theatrical effect. 136 million times $50,000. That's $6.8 trillion just for the buildings alone. Before we even mention the power grid, which would need a total rebuild to handle the load of an all-electric economy, a $4.5 trillion project, according to the Department of Energy's own estimates. He was writing numbers on a digital board now, and they were projected on screens throughout the studio. Then there's your plan to get rid of air travel. Just ban it. Tell Americans they simply can't fly anymore. Instead, you want to build high-speed rail across the whole country, coast to coast, and border to border. The estimated cost for a full high-speed rail system is $2 trillion, and it would take 14 hours to get from New York to LA instead of 5. I'm certain Americans are going to absolutely love that trade-off. AOC attempted to cut him off. She claimed those figures were just pumped up by the fossil fuel industry. These stats actually come directly from analysts within your own party. Bongino snapped right back. We're not talking about Republican hit pieces here. These reports are from the Congressional Budget Office, the Department of Energy, and independent economists all trying to wrap their heads around your pipe dream. He reached down and produced even more paperwork. But this is where things get truly fascinating. While you're out here ordering Americans to ditch air travel, give up their cars, and abandon affordable energy, I began to ask myself, what exactly is your carbon footprint, Congresswoman? So I decided to do a little investigative work. A detailed spreadsheet flashed onto the screen. Just last year, you took to the skies 47 times. 47 separate flights. That basically averages out to about one trip every single week. Going from D.C. to New York, New York to L.A., L.A. to Texas, Texas to Florida, and right back to D.C. You've spent more time on a plane than most professional travel influencers. Your carbon footprint from flying by itself is equivalent to 17 normal Americans for a whole year. He focused the camera in on two specific entries, and these two right here are particularly interesting. Flights on March 15th and August 7th, both on private jets. Now, your staff argued these were necessary for security, but the reality is that private jets dump 5 to 14 times more CO2 per person than a standard commercial flight. So, you chose to fly private. You hopped on private jets while telling coal miners in West Virginia they need to learn how to code and start installing solar panels. The crowd was absolutely captivated. This was pure hypocrisy, exposed through cold, hard data. But let's take a closer look at those coal miners, Bongino continued, his tone turning sharp. Your proposal would completely wipe out fossil fuels by the year 2030. We're talking about roughly 50,000 coal jobs, 120,000 in oil and gas jobs, and another 300,000 positions in supporting industries. That's nearly 500,000 livelihoods just vanished. He brought up even more statistics. Your suggested fix, retraining programs and green energy roles, sounds fantastic in a short tweet. But here is the actual reality on the ground. Your typical coal miner brings home about $67,000 annually. It's grueling, risky labor, but it keeps food on the table for their families. Meanwhile, the average person installing solar panels only makes $32,000 a year. So you're basically asking these workers to train for jobs that pay less than half what they make now, and somehow you expect them to be grateful. Bongino's voice began to swell. Let me share the story of a man named Robert Kimball. He's a fictional character for legal purposes, but he's based on dozens of very real people I've encountered. Robert is 48 years old. He's spent 26 years working in the coal mines. He has 2 teenagers in high school, a mortgage to pay, and a wife who works part-time nursing shifts. If your plan goes through, Robert loses his livelihood. Sure, he could go through retraining. Of course, that's 18 months of schooling during which he earns absolutely nothing. Then he lands a solar installation gig for $32,000 a year. His monthly mortgage payment alone sits at $1,800. His children's college savings are gone. His retirement is wiped out, and his sense of dignity is completely shattered. He stared directly at AOC. But let's be honest, you don't actually care about Robert, do you? That's because Robert doesn't live in a trendy neighborhood in Brooklyn or Queens. Robert isn't one of your followers on Instagram. Robert is just part of that irrelevant middle America that you soar over on your way to another climate summit. AOC was clearly getting heated now, which was precisely what Bongino was aiming for. "Let's discuss those climate conferences," Bongino said with a smooth confidence. "Take COP26 in Glasgow, for instance. You were in attendance. You traveled in business class. I have the receipts to prove it. You stayed at a high-end luxury hotel. I have the documentation for that as well. The carbon footprint for just one night at that hotel equals what the typical American generates in an entire month. But hey, you gave a fantastic speech about sacrifice, so I suppose it all just balances out in the end." He produced a series of photographs, some genuine and some mock-ups for this scenario, but every single one was devastating. Here you are at some fancy farm-to-table restaurant in Glasgow, where the entrees cost $85. Here you are at a designer boutique, making a $340 purchase. Here you are seeing the sights in a massive diesel-powered tour bus, because nothing screams climate emergency quite like sightseeing in a rig that only gets 6 miles to the gallon. The progressive members of the crowd were starting to look pretty uncomfortable now. These weren't just simple disagreements over policy. These were actual receipts. But let's return to the actual victims of your Green New Deal. Bongino stated, "And I'm not just talking about the coal miners you write off as dinosaurs, or the oil workers you seem to view as inherently evil. Let's talk about a grandmother living in Arizona." He brought up a detailed cost analysis on the screen. Meet Helen Patterson, a 76-year-old living on a fixed Social Security income of $1,400 a month. Right now, her electric bill in the blistering Phoenix heat is about $120 a month. Under the mandates of the Green New Deal, based on figures from utility companies studying these requirements, her bill would skyrocket to $890 a month. Let me repeat that for you, $890, which is more than half of her entire income just to keep the lights on. He paused to let that reality sink in. Or consider the Johnson family, factory workers up in Michigan. Both parents work at an auto plant that builds traditional internal combustion vehicles. Under your proposal, that entire plant gets shut down. They get offered a chance to retrain for electric vehicle production. That sounds like a win, doesn't it? Except for one thing. The new EV plant is 140 miles away, and they simply can't afford the cost of moving. They can't even afford to drive to work anymore. They're losing their jobs, their houses, and their entire sense of security. And it's all to satisfy your particular vision of the future. Bongino's tone dropped, becoming low and almost menacing. Or look at Frank Martinez, a fourth-generation farmer out in Iowa. His family has been working that same soil for nearly a century now. Your Green New Deal demands that every single piece of farm machinery be switched over to electric. Replacing his tractors, combines, and gear would run him about $340,000. Meanwhile, his total profit for the year is only $67,000. Go ahead and run those numbers, Congresswoman. because we all know you aren't going to. He took a few steps closer to her podium. This Green New Deal isn't actually designed to save the Earth. It's strictly about control. It's about forcing every American to rely on government handouts once you've stripped away their means of supporting themselves. It's about funneling all the power into Washington and forcing citizens to beg for the right to heat their houses, drive their vehicles, and just live their lives. His voice built up to a powerful roar. And while regular working folks are forced to choose between keeping the lights on and putting food on the table, you'll be jetting off to conferences, lounging in luxury hotels, dining at expensive restaurants, and preaching to everyone else about the need for sacrifice. That isn't what leadership looks like, Congresswoman. That is a total con job. It's the oldest hustle in the book. Follow my orders, but don't look at my actions. It's rules for you, but special treatment for me. The crowd exploded. Even a few progressives started cheering, swept up in the heat of his righteous fury. "You really want to tackle climate change?" Bongino asked, his voice softer now, but just as intense. "Fantastic. Let's put our money into nuclear power. Let's focus on advancing battery tech. Let's come up with real-world market solutions that don't involve ruining the lives of millions of people." But that isn't quite revolutionary enough for your tastes, is it? That's not going to land you on the front of any magazines. That won't turn you into the poster child for a new movement. He pivoted toward the camera. If your energy bills are skyrocketing, if you're scared of losing your livelihood to these green mandates, or if you're just sick of being lectured by elitists who act like carbon footprints don't apply to them, leave a comment below. Share this video, because the only way we end this is by making the price of hypocrisy far more expensive than the perks of being a celebrity. AOC stood there in silence, completely unable to pull a response together. The numbers were just too plain to ignore. The double standards were impossible to miss. The evidence was absolutely devastating. And as for Bongino, he was only just warming up. While they were on break, you could see AOC's staff swarming her as they scrambled to come up with a game plan. They were getting crushed, but she stepped back out for round 4 with a brand new angle. Righteous indignation. "Mr. Bongino clearly enjoys focusing on isolated cases," she started, her voice sounding sharp. "But let's discuss the systemic problems at play here. Let's talk about reforming the police, about how minority communities are simultaneously over-policed and left without enough protection, about how we have to reimagine what public safety really means." "Reimagine," Bongino echoed, with a hint of genuine sadness in his tone. "Is that the new label for defund the police these days? Reimagine. That's some pretty slick rebranding you've got there. Let's take a look at the footage." A montage began to play on the screen. It showed AOC at different rallies and sit-downs over the past 2 years. "We have to defund the police departments. The budgets for law enforcement are way too high. The whole concept of policing is completely broken. We should cut police spending and put that money back into our neighborhoods." Every single clip was time-stamped, cited, and clearly featured her. "Those are the words that came out of your own mouth, Congresswoman," Bongino said flatly. "They weren't twisted, they weren't AI generated, and they aren't some GOP talking point. These are your literal words. You explicitly called for taking money away from the police. You stood shoulder to shoulder with activists demanding budget cuts for law enforcement. You posted it on Twitter. You spoke it out loud. You took full ownership of it." He let that sink in, right up to the moment it wasn't politically useful anymore. Now you're calling it reimagining. But the American public isn't that gullible. They haven't forgotten. And even more to the point, they remember exactly what went down in the cities that actually followed your advice. A map of major metropolitan areas flashed onto the screen. "Let's take a little tour of defund territory," Bongino said with a grim expression. "Take New York City. Your own backyard. Back in 2010. Following the defund movement you pushed for, the NYPD budget was slashed by a staggering $1 billion. $1 billion. You cheered for it. You claimed it was a major win. Do you want to know what else took place that same year? A set of stats appeared on the monitor. Homicides jumped by 47%. Shootings skyrocketed by 97%. And hate crimes climbed by 76%. But it wasn't only the violent offenses that went up. Grand larceny rose by 66%. Auto thefts increased by 67%. Home break-ins were up 42%. By every metric, the city became significantly more dangerous. And that's not just right-wing spin. Those are the NYPD's official crime reports. It's all part of the public record. He shifted his focus to the next city on the list, Minneapolis, which was basically ground zero for the defund movement. The city council there actually voted to tear down their police department. You gave them a round of applause for it. You called it a bold display of leadership. Here's how that worked out. Carjackings surged by 537%, 537%. Violent crime overall went up by 22%. And here is the real punchline. The rich neighborhoods just hired their own private security teams. Meanwhile, the struggling neighborhoods got stuck with empty promises and a wave of crime. Even more data popped up on the screen. The Portland police budget was gutted as well. Officers started quitting in droves. Average response times surged from 7 minutes all the way up to 18. Crime rates went through the roof. Businesses abandoned the downtown area. The city actually put up physical barriers just to protect buildings from the chaos. But at least the city council could feel good about their progressive policies. So there was that. Bongino's voice grew tighter and more controlled, making it feel even more intense. Seattle, San Francisco, Philly, and Chicago. Every city that embraced defund saw the exact same pattern. Crime spiked. Response times lagged. Officer morale was destroyed, and communities were left less safe. But you didn't just support these policies from a distance. You actually cheered them on. You held them up as the standard to follow. He reached for a letter, his hands visibly shaking. This message is from a woman named Keisha Washington. She's 42 years old and a single mother of 3. She lives in the South Bronx, right in your own district. She wrote to me after her 19-year-old son, Marcus, was killed in a robbery that never should have happened. He read directly from the page, his voice heavy with raw emotion. "Mr. Bongino, my son was just walking home from his job at the grocery store. 2 men jumped him and tried to rob him. He had a bit of cash in his pocket. They shot him for $47. I called 911 at 10:47 p.m. The police didn't arrive until 11:10 p.m. That's 23 minutes. Before the defund movement, the average response time in my neighborhood was only 8 minutes. If they had arrived in 8 minutes, maybe Marcus would still be alive. Maybe I'd still have my son. But our congresswoman insisted we needed to defund the police. She told us we'd be safer. She was wrong, and now my son is dead." The studio went completely silent. You could hear a pin drop as people held their breath. "That isn't just a statistic," Bongino said softly. "That is a human being. That's a mother who will never see her child again because you put your ideology over her safety. He looked up at AOC, and there were real tears in his eyes. How many boys like Marcus is your revolution worth? How many mothers like Keisha have to lose their children before you admit you were wrong? But he wasn't finished yet, because this is where the hypocrisy becomes truly sickening. Bongino kept going, his voice hardening once more. While you were calling to defund the police and marching with activists to slash budgets, what were you doing for yourself? He pulled out official FOIA documents. This is the cost of your personal security detail, paid for by the Capitol Police and the NYPD. Year 1, $387,000. Year 2, $412,000. Year 3, $456,000. Over 3 years, you've cost taxpayers $1.2 million in police protection while arguing that their budgets should be cut. The hypocrisy was absolutely staggering. "Let me break this down," Bongino said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You get armed security, Congresswoman, while simultaneously arguing that the police are the problem. You're taking protection from the very institution you're trying to tear down. And the moment someone sends you a mean tweet, you're asking for even more security. But Keisha Washington in the Bronx gets a 23-minute wait and a dead son." He pulled out even more records. "Here is a call log from your office requesting a police presence at your own events. 17 separate requests in just 1 year. You wanted police protection when you spoke to supporters, when you went to galas, and when you attended award shows. Police protection for you. But when it comes to regular Americans in high-crime neighborhoods, they're told to wait. Or better yet, they can just call a social worker." The audience was completely mesmerized. "And here's my favorite part of this whole nightmare," Bongino said. "You've also consistently voted for strict gun control. You want to make it nearly impossible for law-abiding citizens to protect themselves. So, let me get this straight. You want to defund the police who protect everyday Americans. You want to disarm them so they can't defend themselves. And you want armed security for yourself because you think you're special." He walked right up to her podium, getting close enough that she had to look up at him. "That isn't social justice, Congresswoman. That is aristocracy. That's a let-them-eat-cake mentality while you hide behind walls and armed guards. Police protection for you, but not for the grandmother in your district who's terrified to leave her home after dark. Security for you, but not for the shop owner who's been robbed 3 times because police response times have tripled. Armed guards for you, but lectures about privilege for the single father who just wants a legal gun to protect his family." His voice dropped to a near whisper, yet it carried through the room like a thunderclap. "Do you want to know what the real tragedy is? Officers actually wanted to protect people. Good cops, and most of them are good, wanted to serve their communities. But you turned them into the enemy. You turned their professions into an impossible struggle. You forced them to decide between performing their duties and being branded as killers. And as they resigned in massive numbers, with spirits crushed, response times soaring, and crime spiraling, you pointed the finger at everyone but yourself." He pivoted back toward the camera. "If you or someone you love has been impacted by rising crime, if you've waited in fear for help that arrived too late, if you've lost someone because politicians prioritized ideology over safety, share this message. Because Marcus Washington deserves better. Keisha Washington deserves better. And every American deserves leaders who value their safety as much as they value their own." AOC tried to react, tried to pivot to data on police misconduct, but her voice was trembling and the words weren't resonating. The personal toll was too high. the hypocrisy too blatant, and Dan Bongino had 2 more rounds to go. The moderator tried to guide the debate toward closing remarks, but Bongino wasn't finished. AOC looked drained, beaten down, but she tried one last move, returning to her core message. "When it's all said and done," she stated, trying to sound defiant, "I'm fighting for democratic socialism, for a system that puts people before profits, for economic justice and equality." Bongino actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine, full-throated roar. "Oh, we are definitely talking about your commitment to socialism," he remarked, grinning now. "This is going to be fun, because, Congresswoman, you are not a socialist. You're just a capitalist with world-class branding, and I can prove it." He produced a folder. "Let's talk about your campaign storefront, AOCstore.com. It's a hit with young progressives, peddling gear with slogans like Tax the Rich, Green New Deal, Eat the Rich, very revolutionary, very anti-capitalist. There's just one small catch. You're raking in a massive profit from it." Financial records appeared on the screen. 2-year revenue from your campaign shop, $4.2 million. That is million with an M. Once you account for manufacturing, shipping, and overhead, your take-home profit was $2.8 million. Look, I'm not the socialist here, but I'm pretty sure banking nearly $3 million selling T-shirts that say, "Tax the Rich," is the most capitalist thing I've ever heard of. The crowd erupted in laughter, and even some progressives were shaking their heads. "But wait, it gets even better," Bongino pushed on. "Where are these garments actually produced? Your own website remains silent on that. Very mysterious. However, some independent reporters decided to do some investigative work. It turns out the supplier seems to be located overseas and isn't union-made. We're likely talking about Bangladesh or Vietnam. So, you're peddling anti-capitalist swag produced in nations known for having some of the lowest labor protections on the planet. The hypocrisy is so dense, you could practically sell it." He highlighted the specific profit margins. Your Tax the Rich shirt sells for $30. Production cost is approximately $450. That is a staggering markup of around 600 sitski. You are pulling in better margins than the very corporations you criticize. You have essentially become the capitalist pig that your own slogans were designed to attack. Even more paperwork flashed up. But now, let's see where all that cash actually ends up. Official filings reveal that a mere 22% of your merchandise revenue goes toward running your campaign. Just 22%. So where is the rest of it going? It's being funneled into consulting, speaking fees, overhead, and my personal favorite, strategic communications, which includes checks written to your partner, Riley Roberts. $120,000 over 2 years for marketing. Do you want to know what kind of marketing he actually produced? Nobody has a clue. There's no portfolio of work and no record of results. Just a 6-figure payout to your boyfriend. AOC's face was flush with anger. "But wait, there's more," Bongino teased, channeling infomercial energy. "Let's take a look at your own personal rise to wealth. It truly is a classic American success story." A timeline popped up on the display. In 2018, you're a bartender. You had student debt, a roommate, a used car, and were scraping by month to month. The ultimate working-class underdog. That was your entire brand. That was the image you sold. The timeline shifted forward. In 2019, during your first year in office, you dropped $7,000 just on clothes. That's more than what some struggling American households earn in a year. You moved into a high-end luxury apartment in the heart of D.C. You began attending elite galas in designer threads, even hitting the Met Gala, where tickets run $35,000, sporting a gown that screamed, "Tax the rich." It was the absolute height of irony. The timeline kept moving. By 2020, you've purchased a Tesla for $48,000. You began taking trips to some very high-end vacation spots. Your Instagram feed transformed from subway commutes to glamorous rooftop bars. Then came 2021. People started noticing you in high-priced designer eyewear. That specific watch, $380. Those shoes you wore to the climate summit, $420. By 2022, your estimated net worth had reached $1.5 million. In just 4 short years, you went from a struggling bartender to a literal millionaire. Congresswoman, you didn't just achieve the American dream, you basically hit fast forward on it. Bongino casually leaned back against his podium. And look, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. This is the land of opportunity, after all. You have every right to earn a living. You are allowed to be incredibly successful. It's perfectly fine to enjoy the benefits of a capitalist system. However, and this is a massive but, you can't do that while simultaneously preaching to everyone about how evil capitalism is. You shouldn't be making a fortune selling anti-capitalist gear. You can't join the Millionaires Club and then tell regular workers they shouldn't want to be wealthy. He produced even more records of her campaign finances. Let's take a look at how you're spending your campaign funds. You spent $67,000 at luxury restaurants in just 1 year. According to your filings, you had strategy meetings at Michelin-starred restaurants because, evidently, the perfect spot to plot a progressive revolution is over an $85 entree, as images of AOC at various pricey spots appeared on the screen. "Here's what really bothers me," Bongino said, his voice sharpening. "You're always going after billionaires. You claim nobody needs that kind of money. You say being a billionaire is immoral. You say, okay, so let's use that same logic on you." He held up a chart for comparison. Your salary as a member of Congress is $174,000. The average household income in your district, the very people you represent, is only $59,000. Based on your own definition of what's moral and necessary, you're making 3 times more than you actually need. You're sitting on extra wealth that could be given back to families struggling in Queens. He stared straight at her. "So, here is my challenge to you, Congresswoman, and I'm issuing it right now on live TV. If you truly stand by your principles, if you really believe no one should have more than they use and that wealth needs to be shared, then do it. Drop your salary to $59,000 and give the rest to families in your district. Leave your luxury apartment and find a modest home in Queens. Get rid of your Tesla and start taking the subway like the people you represent. Give up the designer clothes and start shopping at Target. Start living by your own values." The room went completely silent. "You won't do it," Bongino said without hesitation. "Because you don't really believe in socialism. You believe in socialism for everyone else, but capitalism for yourself. You've learned how to build a brand by attacking success, while you're quietly becoming successful yourself. You figured out that the best way to get rich in America is to be its most famous anti-capitalist. Honestly, it's a brilliant move. It's wrong, but it's brilliant." He tidied up his documents. "You aren't some revolutionary congresswoman. You're just an entrepreneur who found a gap in the market. You're selling a socialist fantasy to people who don't realize you're the one profiting from the deal. You're a girl boss capitalist wearing a democratic socialist disguise. And the most tragic part is that your supporters don't even realize it. The conservatives in the audience broke into cheers. Even some of the progressives looked uneasy when faced with facts they just couldn't deny. You want to discuss the billionaire class? Bongino kept going. You're well on your way to becoming one of them. Except you're doing it by selling a revolution instead of a physical product. But it's the exact same game. Find a market and exploit it. Use it to make money. That isn't socialism. That is the most capitalist thing you could possibly do. AOC looked completely crushed. Her entire identity was being torn apart on live TV, and she had no way to defend herself because the numbers were accurate. The evidence was real, and the hypocrisy was impossible to ignore. If you're fed up with socialist politicians living like capitalists, Bongino said, looking at the camera, if you're tired of being lectured on greed by people who've learned how to profit from a revolution, then share this everywhere. Because the scam only works if people stay in the dark. There wasn't even a break before the final round began. AOC was clearly rattled as her team scrambled to pass her notes, but Bongino wouldn't let her catch her breath. His tone changed one last time. He sounded less like an attack dog and more like a prosecutor giving a closing statement. "You know what, Congresswoman?" he started, his voice almost softening. "I almost feel sorry for you. Almost. Because I grew up in Queens as well. We walked the same streets and faced the same struggles, just in a different generation with the same dreams. And I still remember what it was like to see politicians promise the world and deliver absolutely nothing." He stepped away from his podium toward the center of the stage, making the moment feel more personal. "But unlike you, I haven't come here to make promises. I'm here because someone needs to hold you accountable. Someone has to be a voice for the people you've left behind. And I have their words right here in my hand." He produced a stack of letters. "These are from the people in your own district. Real people writing real letters. I'm going to read a few of them, and I want you to look at me while I do it." He opened up the first one. It's from Maria, a 62-year-old retired teacher. "Dear Mr. Bongino, I voted for her because she promised she'd fight for us. She said she knew what it was like to have a hard time. But my medication costs just jumped 40%. My rent went up $300 every month. My grandson can't even find a job. I called her office 17 times. 17 times. And I never once got a call back. Yet every day I see her on television, championing causes in far-off places and debating national politics. But what about the people here? What about those of us who actually put her in office? We've become completely invisible to her." Bongino glanced up. AOC refused to meet his gaze. "Then there's James, a 41-year-old small business owner. I was forced to shut down my restaurant after it had been open for 30 years. My father was the one who started it. I was meant to hand it down to my own son one day. Instead, the confusing regulations, mandates, and shutdown rules made it impossible to continue. I simply couldn't make it work. I reached out for support. I tried calling her office. I sent over emails. I got absolutely nothing back. Yet, she managed to find the time to attend the Met Gala. She found plenty of time to grace the covers of magazines, but she couldn't find a single moment for me to PT. My family's entire legacy has vanished, and she doesn't even have a clue who I am." Here is another letter. Rosa is a 28-year-old nurse. "During the pandemic, I worked double and triple shifts, terrified every single day that I might bring the virus home to my family. She labeled us as heroes. She stood there and cheered for us, But when a bill came up that would have provided tax relief to healthcare workers, she voted it down because she felt it wasn't progressive enough. That specific bill would have put $4,000 back in my pocket. That amount covers 3 full months of my student loan debt. However, it didn't perfectly fit her ideological purity, so she just said no. I guess heroes are only good for photo opportunities. It seems that providing real help is just too complex for her. Bongino's voice trembled with genuine emotion. To be clear, these aren't just my words. These are the voices of your own constituents, the people you promised to serve and who truly believed in you. And they aren't the only ones feeling this way. He then produced a detailed document. I had a team of researchers gather hard data and federal statistics specifically on your district. The findings are absolutely heartbreaking. Various statistics began to flash across the screen. Since you entered office, the unemployment rate in NY14 has climbed by 3.2%. Small business shutdowns have skyrocketed by 47%. When you adjust for inflation, the median income has actually dropped by 8%. Surveys regarding quality of life show that resident satisfaction has plummeted by 31 points. All the while, the national average for similar districts has actually been getting better. Your district is falling apart while your celebrity status just keeps growing. He paused to let those words resonate. But we aren't just talking about your district. Let's take a look at your actual performance in Congress. Look at your legislative effectiveness score. This nonpartisan metric, which tracks how successful you are at actually passing laws, is telling. You rank 230th out of 240 Democratic members. You have sponsored 23 different bills. Not a single one has passed. 0. You've been sitting in Congress for 4 years now without passing one piece of legislation. Even more data appeared on the screen. Your committee attendance is only at 67%, which is well below the average. When it comes to floor votes, you've been absent for 11% of them. The person who held your seat before you only missed 3%. You've only held 12 town halls with your constituents in 4 years. Your predecessor managed to average 58 town halls per term. By any objective measure, you are performing worse at the job of being a congresswoman than the person you replaced. Bongino's voice began to rise. But do you know what the reality is? You are absolutely brilliant at handling the media. You've managed to make 847 media appearances over the last 4 years. That averages out to 1 appearance every 1.7 days. You're on television more often than most professional actors. You have graced the covers of 14 different magazines. The estimated media value of all that coverage is a staggering $200 million. You are essentially a celebrity who just happens to occupy a seat in Congress. He stepped even closer to her podium. You built your fame by attacking the establishment, all while becoming a part of that very establishment yourself. You turned yourself into a global brand while the people you represent were reduced to mere statistics. You found a way to monetize revolution while the families in your district struggled to pay their rent. You transformed into everything you once claimed to hate, and you did it so slowly that your supporters didn't even realize it until it was far too late. His voice softened, taking on an almost sorrowful tone. But let's get to the heart of what's really going on here. We're talking about your ideology, democratic socialism. You wear that label like a badge of honor. You've made it the very core of your identity. Allow me to show you exactly what that ideology has achieved every single time it's been put to the test. He then presented several historical examples. Take Venezuela, which had a booming economy in the 1990s and was the wealthiest nation in South America before socialism took hold. Now, The situation is so dire that people are forced to eat animals from the zoo. Inflation skyrocketed to a staggering 1,000,000%. The average citizen there has lost 24 pounds simply because there isn't enough food to eat. Yet, the socialist leaders remain incredibly wealthy and maintain all the power. It's funny how that always seems to work out. Here are more examples. The Cuban Revolution promised wealth and prosperity for everyone. 60 years later, medical doctors are only making $20 a month. People are still risking their lives on makeshift rafts just to escape. Meanwhile, the Castro family's estimated net worth is roughly $900 million. It seems that revolutionary leaders always manage to do quite well for themselves under socialism. The Soviet Union eventually collapsed under the sheer weight of its own internal contradictions. 70 years of that so-called socialist paradise left behind nothing but breadlines, secret police, and millions of deaths. But the party elites? They still had their luxury villas, cars, and plenty of food. Bongino's voice turned sharp and cutting. It happens every single time, in every single place. Socialism always promises equality, but ends up delivering tyranny. It promises wealth and abundance, but delivers nothing but poverty. It promises to empower the people, yet it always hands that power over to the elite. And the ones who push for it the hardest are always the ones who make sure they are exempt from the consequences. He pointed his finger directly at her. You stand there with your iPhone made by capitalism, your Tesla made by capitalism, your designer wardrobe made by capitalism, and your luxury apartment made by capitalism. Everything you have, everything you enjoy, and everything that makes your life comfortable was created by the very system you want to destroy. His voice climbed to a thunderous peak. You don't want to tear down capitalism because you have a better system waiting. You want to tear it down because if everyone is equally poor, your lavish lifestyle looks less hypocritical. If everyone is dependent on the government, your power increases. If everyone needs permission to succeed, you become the gatekeeper. It's not about justice, it's about control. He produced one final document and held it aloft. This right here is a petition. It holds 23,000 signatures from your own constituents calling for your recall. That's 23,000 people who voted for you, believed in you, and trusted you. But now they want you gone. He began to read from it. Miguel Rodriguez says, "She forgot where she came from." Jennifer Walsh writes, "She's not for us anymore." David Park states, "I want someone who actually shows up." Lisa Chen demands, "I need a representative, not a celebrity." Marcus Johnson adds, "She broke every promise she made." Bongino's voice cracked just slightly. 23,000 people. That's not a vocal minority. That's not right-wing propaganda. That's your own constituents telling you that you failed them. He walked right up to her, close enough that the camera could capture them both in the frame. "You said you wanted a revolution, Congresswoman." "Well, you got one. But it's not the one you expected. It's the people you abandoned realizing they don't actually need you. It's the families you forgot deciding they won't forget you. It's the revolution of common sense rising up against your elite socialism." His voice softened, but remained firm. "You asked me earlier what I stand for. I'll tell you right now. I stand for Maria, who can't afford her prescriptions while you expense $300 dinners. I stand for James, who lost his life's work while you posed for magazine covers. I stand for Rosa, who saved lives and got nothing but empty praise while you collected $400,000 in security costs. I stand for Keisha Washington, whose son died while police response times tripled because you championed the defund movement. I stand for the 25,000 families who never got those Amazon jobs because you chose ideology over opportunity. He looked directly into the camera lens, ignoring AOC entirely. Now, I stand for every person you flew over on your way to your next television appearance. Every constituent whose call you never returned. Every small business that closed while you championed regulations, and every worker who lost their job while you preached about justice from your luxury apartment. He turned back to face AOC one final time. That's the difference between us, Congresswoman. I remember where I came from. You forgot. I represent the people. You represent a brand. I fight for constituents. You fight for followers. I care about results. You care about retweets. The silence in the studio was absolute. And when this is all over, when the cameras stop rolling, the applause fades, and the media moves on to the next shiny object, you'll still be a millionaire celebrity. And Maria will still be choosing between food and medicine. James will still have a closed restaurant. Rosa will still be paying her student loans. Kesha will still be missing her son. His final words were barely above a whisper, but they echoed through the studio. You're a fraud, Congresswoman. A well-marketed, expertly branded, social media-savvy fraud. You sold people hope and gave them nothing but disappointment. You promised a revolution and delivered a celebrity. You claimed to fight for the working class while becoming the elite yourself. He gathered his papers, put them back in the briefcase, and closed it with a definitive click. I'm done. I've said what needed to be said. I've shown the receipts. The American people can decide for themselves, but they can't say they weren't warned. They can't say they didn't know, because now everybody knows exactly who Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez really is. The moderator tried to give AOC a chance to respond. She opened her mouth, closed it, and tried again. Her hands were shaking. This is all taken out of context, she finally managed, but her voice had no conviction. Congresswoman, Bongino said quietly, I gave you context, 37 pages of it. The only thing out of context is you thinking you could keep the con going forever. She tried again. The issues are more complex than what? Than your hypocrisy? Than your failed policies? Than the people you abandoned? There's no complexity here. You promised to represent working people, and instead you became a celebrity. That's not complex. That's just sad. AOC stood up, removed her microphone, and walked off the stage. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't make a statement. She just left. Her team scrambled after her. The room fell into a stunned, heavy silence for a moment. Then, bit by bit, the conservative side started to clap. That applause quickly gathered steam. Soon enough, it turned into a full-blown standing ovation. It wasn't for the drama or the show, but for the sake of accountability. In just 17 minutes, the hashtag Bongino Receipts was the #1 trend on Twitter. Even before the cameras stopped rolling, the clips had already gone viral. Major news networks from both sides of the aisle were forced to run the story. There was simply no way they could ignore it. The evidence was just too well documented. The hypocrisy was blatant, and the total collapse was undeniable. By the following morning, AOC's district office was getting hammered with phone calls. For the most part, those callers weren't happy. Her primary opponent, once seen as a total long shot, suddenly landed a massive endorsement from a union that used to be in AOC's corner. Financial backers began pulling their support. Members of the squad started keeping their distance, putting out careful statements about focusing on their own backyards. Her approval rating in New York's 14th district plummeted by 34 points in a single week. The recall petition picked up another 15,000 signatures. New town halls were put on the calendar, And this time she couldn't hide, because the press was going to be there either way. The news networks played that confrontation on a constant loop. It wasn't just the conservative outlets, it was everyone. This wasn't just about partisan talking points anymore. It was about cold, hard evidence. It was about the receipts. It was a masterclass in accountability, in an era where most politicians have forgotten what that even means. University communications classes even added the footage to their lessons, not for the debate style, but as a case study in what happens when solid prep meets the right moment, when facts crush deflections, and when accountability finally catches up with hypocrisy. But the most significant impact was actually much quieter and far deeper. Maria, a 62-year-old retired teacher, received a call from a primary challenger who actually wanted to hear her concerns. James, a local restaurant owner, was interviewed on the news about how these policies were killing small businesses. A nurse named Rosa got to testify before a city council committee regarding support for healthcare workers. Kesha Washington's story finally made it into a national magazine, and a scholarship fund was set up in Marcus's memory. The very people AOC had overlooked suddenly found their voices again. Their personal stories mattered once more. This wasn't because Dan Bongino was some kind of hero. He'd be the first to tell you he isn't. But because someone with a massive platform finally used it to speak for them. What took place that night went way beyond one politician's double standards. It was a long overdue reckoning. It highlighted the massive gap between empty promises and actual results, between performing for the cameras and true service, between building a personal brand and real representation. It was the exact moment when hard evidence became more powerful than catchy slogans, when documentation shut down every excuse, and when the ignored voices were finally amplified so loud they could no longer be brushed aside. Dan Bongino didn't actually take down Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that night. She was undone by her own actions. It was her own choices and her own blatant hypocrisy. He simply did the legwork, laid out the proof, and presented it in a way that made it impossible to ignore or dodge. That briefcase only held 37 pages. But in reality, it held something far more significant. Accountability. It's the radical notion that we should judge politicians by what they achieve, not what they say, by their service instead of their social media following, and by whether they actually help their people rather than just their brand. 18 months have passed since that night. AOC is still holding her seat in Congress, but the spotlight has moved on. She was stripped of her top-tier committee assignments. Her appearances in the media have tanked by 76%. Now, she's facing the toughest primary fight of her life against a candidate running on a simple promise. Show up for Queens. Her online merch store was shuttered after reporters found out the goods were being made overseas. That big book deal she had was quietly dropped. Her speaking fees crashed from $40,000 per event down to just $8,000. Her boyfriend, Riley, is no longer collecting a check from the campaign. Her Instagram follower count actually started shrinking, a nearly impossible feat for a modern politician. She moved out of her high-end apartment and back into a more modest place in Queens. She's back to riding the subway, and this time it isn't for a photo op. It's because she has to. She started doing town halls again, but the vibe has completely shifted. They're quieter now, filled with people asking tough questions with fewer cameras and a whole lot more accountability. And Dan Bongino? He's still behind the mic, still holding the powerful's feet to the fire, still doing the research, and still keeping the receipts. That briefcase has become a piece of history. He eventually auctioned it off for charity, raising $340,000 for small business recovery in Queens. But more importantly, A whole new generation of journalists and activists learned a vital lesson that night. Receipts are everything. Documentation is key. Preparation is the secret. Accountability is what matters most. You can't just talk about a revolution. You actually have to deliver results. You can't just build a brand.